Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. The accident happened on a Tuesday. It's strange how the mundane details stick with you. Tuesday, April 4th. Light rain. Smell of wet asphalt. My wife Melissa texting me she'd be home late from her shift at St. Anthony Hospital in Oklahoma City. My daughter Emma's soccer cleats still mud-caked in the hallway from her weekend game. I never saw the truck that ran the red light at the intersection of Northwest Expressway and Rockwell. The doctor said that was a mercy. When I woke up 3 days later, Deputy Collins was standing awkwardly by my hospital bed, hat in hand, eyes averted. I knew before he spoke. They were both gone. Just like that. The next 8 months dissolved into a blur of grief counseling, prescription bottles, and empty rooms that still held their scent. Our house in Nichols Hills became a mausoleum of memories I couldn't bear to face. The life insurance money sat untouched. My position as an adjunct professor of parapsychology at Oklahoma City University went on indefinite hiatus. Something inside me had fractured, and all my academic knowledge about the other side suddenly felt like cruel mockery. That's when Frank Littlebird called. We'd been colleagues years before, when I was still doing active field research. He'd heard about my loss and had a proposition. There's a church out in Boise City, St. Augustine's, built in 1902, abandoned since '87. The Cimarron County Historical Society wants documentation before they tear it down next month. His voice crackled over my barely charged phone. 2 weeks of work, Jesse, paid, and you'd be doing me a favor. My arthritis can't handle the equipment anymore. Boise City, the most remote corner of Oklahoma's panhandle. Nearly 6 hours northwest of Oklahoma City, a place where the prairie stretched endlessly under vast skies, a place where no one would know me or my story. Why the rush to document? I asked, more out of obligation than interest. Strange reports over the years, lights, sounds. Local teenagers dare each other to spend nights there. 3 went missing in '92. Showed up a week later with no memory of where they'd been. The usual paranormal markers, but lately it's gotten more intense. The caretaker quit last month, just walked off. Left a note with a list of rules, said anyone going in should follow them. I almost hung up. Rules, the desperate fabrications of frightened minds trying to impose order on the unexplainable. I debunked dozens of such haunted location rules in my academic career. I need this, Frank, I said finally, surprising myself. But not for the reasons you think. I didn't elaborate. Couldn't tell him I was seeking punishment, not purpose. Couldn't admit I was hoping that whatever lurked in that church might be real enough, angry enough to reunite me with my family. 3 days later, I drove past the weathered Welcome to Boise City sign, population 1,266. My SUV loaded with cameras, EVP recorders, EMF detectors, and thermal imaging equipment I hadn't touched in years. In my pocket, a folded paper with 7 rules scrawled in shaky handwriting. Rules I was already planning to break. Boise City sits at the crossroads of highways that stretch toward 5 different states. It's the kind of place where the land feels older than time, the high plains of the Oklahoma Panhandle with nothing but pale grass and sky for miles. Main Street looked frozen in 1985, a courthouse in the center of a traffic circle flanked by Dama's Diner, the Cimarron County Bank, and a hardware store with sun-faded merchandise in the windows. I checked into the Black Mesa Motel on the outskirts of town, a single-story row of rooms with peeling paint and a buzzing neon sign. The elderly woman at the front desk, Betty, according to her name tag, raised her eyebrows when I mentioned St. Augustine's. That old church? Haven't been anyone staying there in ages. She slid me a key with a plastic tag marked 7. Sheriff Vaughn might want to know you're going out there. Is there a problem? I asked, signing the register. Betty's lips thinned. Not officially. Just folks around here know to leave it be. I nodded non-committally and carried my duffel to room 7, which smelled of cigarettes poorly masked by industrial cleaner. After unloading my essential equipment, I drove to the county building to meet my contact from the Historical Society. Richard Dawes was waiting in the lobby, a thick file folder under his arm. Mid-60s, weathered face, the careful posture of someone with a bad back. His handshake was firm but fleeting. "Professor Harper? Appreciate you coming all this way." He gestured to a bench. "Frank speaks highly of your work." "Former professor," I corrected. "Just Jesse is fine." We sat, and he handed me the folder. "Here's everything we have on St. Augustine's. Building plans from 1902, parish records until their closure, newspaper clippings." He hesitated. "And statements from the caretaker, Marcus Webb." I flipped through the pages, pausing at black and white photos of a modest Gothic revival church with a single spire. In later photos, the white paint had given way to bare wood, windows boarded over. How long was Webb the caretaker? 27 years. Started after the diocese deconsecrated it. Kept the roof from leaking. Chased away vandals. Never had trouble until last winter. Richard lowered his voice. He was a steady man, not given to imagination, but started reporting strange occurrences. Things moving, voices. He'd leave tools in one place, find them in another. Then in March, he padlocked the place and dropped the keys at my office with those rules. Haven't been able to reach him since. I pulled out the folded paper from my pocket. "These rules." Richard nodded grimly. I smoothed the creased paper on my knee. 7 rules in uneven handwriting. Enter only between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. Be out by sunset. No photography on recording in the basement. If you hear singing from behind the altar, leave immediately. Always acknowledge the statue of St. Augustine with a nod when entering. Leave offerings, coins, food, small items, at the south transept window daily. If the crucifix is missing, do not stay. Never bleed on church grounds. I'd seen similar lists before. A psychological coping mechanism, giving structure to fear. But something about the specificity of these made my skin prickle. "I'll need the keys," I said, folding the paper. Richard hesitated. "I should warn you, 3 kids went in there back in '92, didn't come out for a week. When they did, they were different, hollow-eyed, never spoke about what happened. One of them was my nephew. He still wakes up screaming." I nodded, unsurprised. "I've documented similar cases." "Have you?" Richard studied my face. "And what's your professional opinion on what causes that? Disorientation, group hysteria, possibly hallucinogenic mold spores," I recited automatically, the skeptic's litany I'd repeated in countless lectures. But my heart wasn't in it anymore. Not since April 4th. Not since the truck. Richard looked unconvinced, but dropped a heavy iron key into my palm. "Church is 5 miles northeast on Old Trader Road. Can't miss it. Only building out there. Historical Society is paying for 2 weeks of documentation. But between us, if you wanted to leave sooner, no one would blame you." I pocketed the key. "Anything else I should know?" He hesitated. "Local tribes, the Comanche and Kiowa, they avoided that land long before the church was built. Called it thin ground, where the world's skin stretches too tight." He shook his head. "Just stories." I thanked him and headed to the local grocery to stock up. The teenage cashier at Dale's Market did a double take when I placed my supplies on the counter. Batteries, bottled water, energy bars, salt. "You the guy going to St. Augustine's?" she asked, scanning my items. Word traveled fast in small towns. "That's right. My cousin Dylan went there on a dare last year." She lowered her voice. "Said he saw a priest with no face." I nodded like I was humoring her, but something about her matter-of-fact delivery chilled me. "You know what else people say?" She leaned closer. "They say something out there can look like anybody it wants. Wears their skin like a coat." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Skinwalker, my grandma calls it. But not like the Navajo ones. Something older." I paid for my groceries and left, the girl's words following me to the car. The late afternoon sun stretched my shadow across the parking lot, unnaturally long. I checked my watch. 4:30 p.m. Too late to start work today. As I drove back to the motel, I glimpsed the distant silhouette of St. Augustine's spire on the horizon, stark against the setting sun. For a moment, I could have sworn a light flickered in the bell tower. But that was not possible. The church had no electricity. I woke before dawn, drenched in sweat. The dream lingered. Melissa and Emma standing in a church aisle, backs turned to me, their shadows stretching unnaturally across the floor. When they turned around, their faces were blank expanses of skin. The digital clock read 5:47 a.m. No point trying to sleep now. I showered in lukewarm water, the ancient pipes groaning in protest. Over a breakfast of burnt coffee and a packaged muffin from the motel's sparse continental offering, I reviewed my day's plan. Standard protocol, baseline readings, photographic survey, historical context notes. I'd done this dozens of times before my academic career took over. The morning was crisp, early May sunshine warming the prairie as I drove. GPS was spotty out here, but Richard's directions were clear enough. Old Trader Road started as pavement, degraded to gravel, then finally dirt. The further I got from Boise City, the more isolated I felt. No houses, no power lines, just occasional fence posts marking the boundaries of vast ranches. Then I saw it. St. Augustine's appeared on the horizon like a lone sentinel. The Gothic spire looked wrong against the flat landscape, a dark intrusion. Up close, the church was larger than the photo suggested. 2 stories of weathered wood, now silvery gray with age, boarded windows, a small cemetery to the west, headstones tilting at odd angles. I parked in what had once been a gravel lot, now reclaimed by prairie grass. The church doors faced south, protected by a sagging overhang. Before approaching, I methodically unpacked my equipment. Digital camera, EVP recorder, EMF meter, infrared thermometer, notebook. Almost as an afterthought, I drew out the paper with Webb's rules and scanned it again. Rule 1. Enter only between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. Be out by sunset. My watch read 8:17 a.m. Compliant, for now. Rule 4. Always acknowledge the statue of St. Augustine, with a nod when entering. I shook my head at my own compliance, but decided to follow the rules initially. Establish a control before testing variables. Basic, scientific method. The iron key fought the lock, but eventually surrendered with a heavy click. The door swung inward on protesting hinges. A rush of stale air greeted me, carrying the musty perfume of abandonment. Dust, rotting wood, animal droppings, and something underneath I couldn't identify. Sweet, but metallic. Just inside stood a stone statue, about 3 feet tall. St. Augustine, presumably, though years of dust and cobwebs obscured the details. Only the face remained relatively clean, as if recently wiped. Its eyes seemed to follow me as I gave it a perfunctory nod. Just covering the bases, I told myself. The nave stretched before me, a central aisle with rows of broken pews facing a simple altar. Patches of sunlight filtered through gaps in the boarded windows, dust motes dancing in the beams. The vaulted ceiling disappeared into shadow. I spent the first hour taking systematic photos and readings. Temperature, consistently 7 to 10 degrees cooler than outside. EMF, unremarkable except near the altar, where the needle jumped slightly. Structurally, the church was in better shape than expected, roof intact, floor solid despite water stains. The sanctuary had typical features: altar, pulpit, choir loft above the entrance. 2 transept areas created the classic cruciform shape, and opposite the entrance, a door that presumably led to offices, storage, and the basement. As I photographed the altar, my lens caught a detail I'd missed: a small wooden door behind it, almost invisible against the paneling. Storage for communion elements, most likely. I made a note to check it later. Moving to the south transept, I remembered Rule 5. Leave offerings at the south transept window daily. The window here was boarded like the others, but I noticed something odd: a small pile of objects on the sill. Coins, buttons, a faded ribbon, a candy wrapper, recent offerings. Despite my skepticism, I placed a quarter on the sill, documenting it with a photo. I worked methodically toward the back of the church. The door behind the altar was locked. The north transept contained a broken confessional booth. The choir loft stairs proved too rotted to risk. By noon, hunger drove me back to my car for an energy bar and water. The Oklahoma sun blazed overhead, but did little to warm the chill that had settled in my bones from the church's interior. As I ate, a pickup truck appeared on the horizon, dust billowing behind it. I tensed, unsure whether to expect trouble. The truck, an older Ford with a dented fender, pulled up beside my SUV, and a man in his 30s stepped out. Rangy build, dark hair beneath a worn Stetson, eyes hidden behind reflective sunglasses. "You must be the investigator," he said, approaching with an extended hand. "Sheriff Vaughn. Heard you were out here." I shook his hand. "Jesse Harper. Finding anything interesting?" His tone was casual, but I noted the tension in his shoulders. "Just started documenting. Historical Society hired me to—" "I know why they hired you," he interrupted. "Just making sure everything's okay. We don't get many visitors out here." I gestured to the church. "Any reason I should be concerned?" Sheriff Vaughn removed his sunglasses. His eyes were a startling pale blue against his weather-tanned face. "Let's just say this place has a history of affecting people." "The teenagers in '92? I prompted. His eyes narrowed. "You've done your homework. Yeah, those boys were never right after. Then there's the caretaker who left those crazy rules." "You think the rules are crazy? Don't you?" He studied my face. "You look like a sensible man, Professor." I checked your credentials. Respectable academic. Published author on paranormal phenomena. Usually debunking them. I felt a flicker of unease that he'd researched me. "Yet here you are," he continued, "following rules about nodding to statues and leaving offerings." He nodded toward the quarter visible on the windowsill. I hadn't told anyone I was following the rules. "Just being thorough," I said carefully. "Sure." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Word of advice. There's stories out here older than that church. Comanche legends about creatures that wear human faces. Things that learn your voice, call to your loved ones." The chill returned, settling deeper. "Are you warning me off?" "Just suggesting caution. Some locals think this land was never meant for a church, that whatever was here first resented the intrusion. He put his sunglasses back on. "I'll be checking in. You have my number if anything seems off." As he turned to leave, he added casually, "By the way, no one's seen Marcus Webb since he left those rules. His truck's still in his garage, collecting dust." The sheriff drove away, leaving me with a growing sense of unease. I glanced at my watch, 1:35 p.m., plenty of daylight left. I returned to the church, pausing again to nod at the statue. Its expression seemed different somehow, amused. The thought was ridiculous. This time I headed straight for the door opposite the entrance. It opened to a narrow hallway with 3 doors, 2 on the left, 1 straight ahead. The first left door revealed a small office, personal items long removed, just empty shelves and a desk. The second contained vestments, rotted with age and moisture. The door ahead was heavy, reinforced. The basement, I assumed. It swung open with surprising ease, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. I switched on my flashlight. Rule 2 echoed in my mind. No photography recording in the basement. "Let's see what you're hiding," I muttered, deliberately setting my camera to record video as I descended the steps. The basement was unexpectedly vast, extending well beyond the church's footprint. Support columns created shadowy alcoves throughout. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of stored furniture, moldering boxes, religious paintings facing the walls. Then I noticed the floor. Unlike the wooden planks above, this was packed earth, and etched into it, surrounding the base of each column, were symbols. Not Christian iconography, something older. Spirals, stick figures, angular shapes that made my eyes hurt. A sound stopped me cold, something skittering in the darkness beyond my light's reach. "Hello?" My voice sounded muffled, as if the darkness itself absorbed it. No answer, but the temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in front of me. The camera in my hand suddenly felt very hot. I looked down to see the screen flickering, the battery indicator draining before my eyes. Within seconds, it was dead. No photography in the basement. A clear, high laugh echoed from somewhere in the darkness. A child's laugh. Emma's laugh. I ran for the stairs. I burst through the basement door, slamming it behind me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I leaned against the wall, gasping. The laughter had stopped the moment I turned to flee, but its echo remained burned in my memory. It couldn't have been Emma's laugh. Couldn't. Yet the unique cadence, the particular way she'd hiccup slightly at the end of her giggling fits, it was unmistakable. A sound I'd feared I was beginning to forget. I checked my watch. 2:22 p.m. Still plenty of daylight. My hands trembled as I examined my camera. Despite being fully charged that morning, the battery was completely drained. When I removed and reinserted it, the camera powered on normally, displaying a full charge. Impossible. I scrolled through the saved files, but found nothing from the basement. The last image was of the quarter I'd left on the windowsill. My scientific mind grasped for explanations. Auditory pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find familiar patterns in random sounds. Battery malfunction due to temperature change. But these rationalizations rang hollow, even to me. I forced myself to continue working, focusing on the main floor of the church. Each photograph, each EMF reading, each temperature log was a welcome distraction from what I'd experienced below. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few minutes, I'd snap my head around, certain I'd glimpsed movement at the edge of my vision. A shadow flitting between pews, a figure in the choir loft. But whenever I looked directly, there was nothing. At 3:30 p.m., I decided to examine the small wooden door behind the altar. As I approached, the air grew noticeably colder. The door had no visible handle or lock, just a small depression where one might place a fingertip. I pressed it, and the door swung inward on silent hinges. Beyond was not the storage closet I'd expected, but a narrow passageway. My flashlight revealed rough stone walls descending at a gentle slope. This wasn't on the building plans Richard had provided. Rule 3 flashed in my mind. If you hear singing from behind the altar, leave immediately. I heard no singing, only the hollow sound of air moving through the passage, like distant breathing. Scientific curiosity warred with growing apprehension. I took one step into the passage, then another. The walls were close enough to touch on either side, the ceiling low enough that I had to stoop slightly. The air was noticeably warmer here, unlike the cool basement. It smelled of soil and something else. Candle wax, perhaps. After about 20 feet, the passage opened into a small, circular chamber. My flashlight beam revealed walls covered in faded paintings. Not religious iconography, but crude figures reminiscent of cave art. Animal forms with too many limbs, humanoid shapes with elongated features, and repeated throughout, a symbol like a spiral with 3 lines radiating from its center. In the middle of the chamber stood a stone altar, far older than the church above. Its surface was stained dark, with grooves cut into the stone that led to a small basin at one end. I'd seen similar altars in archaeological texts, sacrificial. On the far side of the chamber, another passage led deeper still. But something stopped me from investigating further. A visceral dread that rose from the pit of my stomach. As I turned to leave, my flashlight caught something on the altar I'd missed before. A small, worn teddy bear. My blood turned to ice. It was Mr. Patches, Emma's favorite toy. The one she was buried with. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on uneven stone. As I fell, my forehead struck the edge of the altar. Sharp pain bloomed, and I felt warm wetness trickle down my temple. Blood. On church grounds. Rule 7. Never bleed on church grounds. A high, sweet singing began somewhere in the passage beyond the chamber. A child's voice, singing, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," Emma's bedtime song. I scrambled to my feet and ran, heart pounding in my ears, nearly cracking my skull on the low ceiling of the passage. Behind me, the singing grew louder, accompanied by the sound of small, running footsteps. I burst out into the main church, slamming the wooden door shut behind me. The singing stopped abruptly, but I could have sworn I heard a soft giggle just before the door closed. My hands shook as I pressed a tissue to my bleeding forehead. I needed to get out, now. Looking at my watch, 3:52 p.m., I hastily gathered my equipment, leaving the EMF meter on the altar in my rush. As I approached the main doors, I glanced at St. Augustine's statue. Its head was turned, facing the altar. I was certain it had been facing the door when I entered. The drive back to town passed in a blur. At the motel, I locked myself in my room and lined the doorway with salt, an old habit from my field research days. Whether I believed in its protective powers or not, the ritual helped calm my frayed nerves. In the bathroom mirror, I examined the cut on my forehead. Not deep, but it had bled freely. As I cleaned it, I couldn't shake the image of Emma's teddy bear on that ancient altar. It was not possible. Mr. Patches was buried with her in Resurrection Cemetery back in Oklahoma City. Yet I knew what I'd seen. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I forced myself to review the day's findings objectively. The camera malfunction in the basement, the hidden chamber beneath the altar, the symbols that matched nothing in Christian iconography, the voice that sounded like Emma. As a researcher, I'd always sought rational explanations for seemingly supernatural events. CO2 levels causing hallucinations, infrasound creating feelings of dread, electromagnetic fields disrupting brain activity. But what rational explanation could there be for Mr. Patches? A knock at my door jolted me from my thoughts. "Who is it?" I called, not moving from the bed. "Sheriff Vaughn. Need to talk to you about St. Augustine's." I hesitated, then crossed to the door, careful not to disturb the line of salt. Through the peephole, I could see the sheriff still in uniform, hat in hand. I opened the door without breaking the salt line. "What about it?" His eyes went to my bandaged forehead, then to the salt. Something flickered across his face, concern, or perhaps confirmation. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, and he entered, carefully stepping over the salt. He didn't comment on it. "You're bleeding," he said flatly. Hit my head. "I'm fine." "On church grounds?" The specific question sent a chill through me. "Why does that matter?" Sheriff Vaughn sat heavily in the room's only chair. "Because you broke Rule 7. I stared at him. "You know the rules. Everyone around here knows the rules." He removed his hat, revealing thinning hair. "Those who've paid attention anyway. The church calls to people sometimes. Shows them things. What kind of things? Things they've lost. Things they want back." His pale eyes studied me. "What did you see today, Professor?" I hesitated, torn between scientific skepticism and the inexplicable reality of my experience. "I heard my daughter. She died 8 months ago, but I heard her laugh. Saw her teddy bear." The admission hung in the air between us. The sheriff nodded slowly. "That's how it starts. It finds what you want most and uses it as bait." "What is it?" "Locals have different names. The old Comanche called it Pahayoko, something like a demon or spirit that can take human form. Settlers who built the church thought they could contain it by building on sacred ground. Some say they made a deal with it. And you believe this?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. "Belief's got nothing to do with it. I've seen what happens when people ignore the rules." He leaned forward. "Those 3 boys in 92? One was my little brother. After they came back, he would talk about a person who could look like anyone. Said it showed him Mom, who died the year before." The hairs on my arm stood up. 2 months later, he walked into our dad's shed and put a shotgun in his mouth. The sheriff's voice remained eerily steady. Left a note saying he couldn't tell what was real anymore. I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Those rules weren't made up by some superstitious caretaker. They're warnings, learned through blood. That's why I'm here. He fixed me with an intense stare. "You broke Rule 7. Blood on church grounds wakes it up, calls to it, gives it permission." "Permission for what?" "To follow you, to become what you most want to see." He stood. "You need to leave Boise City. Tonight." I thought of Emma's laugh. So real, so close. "I can't. Can't or won't." Something in his expression hardened. "Whatever you think you heard, whatever you think you saw, it wasn't your daughter." Anger flared unexpectedly. "You don't know that." "I know that thing feeds on grief and hope. I know it'll wear you down until you can't tell what's real." He moved to the door. "I've seen it before. How it ends." "I'm here to document the church. I still have almost 2 weeks." Sheriff Vaughn shook his head. "You won't last 2 days now that it's noticed you, but I can't force you to leave." He opened the door, then paused. "If you stay, follow the rest of the rules. Be out by sunset. Leave offerings. And for God's sake, if you hear singing, run." After he left, I sat in silence, staring at my equipment spread across the bed. Part of me wanted to pack it all up and drive back to Oklahoma City tonight. But another part, the part that ached with grief and desperate hope, couldn't bear to leave. What if, somehow, the church had created a connection to Emma? What if, through some phenomenon science couldn't yet explain, I could hear my daughter again? I knew it was irrational, dangerous even. But grief isn't rational. My phone chimed, a text message from an unknown number. "Daddy, why did you leave? I'm still at the church. Please come back." Attached was a photo of Mr. Patches, sitting on a church pew. I stared at my phone until the screen went dark. The logical part of my brain offered explanations. Someone had taken my phone while I was in the church, photographed the toy, and sent the message. Or perhaps Sheriff Vaughn was testing me, seeing if I'd rush back after his warning. But the photo showed Mr. Patches exactly as I remembered him. One eye slightly looser than the other, a patch on his left arm where Emma had once spilled grape juice. My hand trembled as I pulled up the number and called it. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a click. "Daddy?" Emma's voice, small and frightened. "Daddy, I'm scared. It's getting dark." My throat constricted. "Who is this?" I managed to say, though I barely recognized my own voice. "It's me, silly. Emma, please come back. I don't like it here alone." "Emma died," I said, hearing the tremor in my words. "You're not her." A pause, then a sob that wrenched my heart. "I'm not dead, Daddy. I'm lost. Please help me." The call ended. I sat frozen, phone clutched in my hand. It was a trick. It had to be. But that voice, the exact pitch, the particular way she said "daddy" with emphasis on the first syllable, it was hers. I checked the time, 7:13 p.m. The sun would be setting soon. Rule 1 was clear: be out by sunset. Logic warred with longing, if there was even the slightest chance. Before I could reconsider, I grabbed my jacket and car keys. The salt line cracked beneath my shoe as I rushed out. The evening air had turned chilly as I sped down empty highways toward the church. Sunset painted the sky in watercolor streaks of orange and purple. I kept checking my phone, hoping for another message, another confirmation. St. Augustine's silhouette appeared on the horizon, the spire a dark needle against the dying light. I pushed the SUV faster, gravel pinging against the undercarriage as I turned onto Old Trader Road. The sun dipped below the horizon just as I pulled into the church lot. Twilight shadows stretched across the weathered facade. All was quiet. I approached the entrance cautiously, flashlight beam bobbing before me. The heavy wooden doors stood slightly ajar, though I distinctly remembered closing them when I left. "Emma?" I called, my voice weak and uncertain. Nothing. I glanced at St. Augustine's statue as I entered, giving it a quick nod despite my urgency. Its stone eyes seemed to follow me as I moved past. The nave was gray with twilight, pews casting long shadows across the aisle. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing nothing unusual. No Mr. Patches, no Emma. "Emma?" I called again, stronger this time. "Honey? Are you here?" A soft sound came from behind the altar, a child's whimper. I rushed forward, heart pounding. The small wooden door stood open, darkness yawning beyond. "Daddy?" Emma's voice echoed from the passage. "I'm scared of the dark." Every instinct screamed danger, but how could I turn away? What kind of father would I be if there was even the smallest chance? I stepped through the door, stooping to enter the passageway. My flashlight illuminated the narrow stone corridor leading to the circular chamber I'd discovered earlier. "I'm coming, Emma. Keep talking so I can find you." "Hurry, Daddy." Her voice seemed to come from beyond the chamber, down the second passage I hadn't explored. "There's something in here with me." I entered the circular room, flashlight beam dancing across the primitive paintings on the walls. The stone altar stood in the center, exactly as before. But Mr. Patches was gone. The second passage beckoned, a black mouth in the far wall. As I approached, a cold draft washed over me, carrying a familiar sweet metallic scent. "Emma?" My voice echoed strangely, coming back distorted. A soft singing began, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." But the voice was wrong. It started as Emma's, but halfway through, it shifted, becoming multiple voices singing in unsettling harmony. Rule 3. If you hear singing from behind the altar, leave immediately. I backed away, nearly stumbling over the altar. The singing grew louder, no longer even attempting to mimic a child's voice. It became a discordant chorus that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I turned to flee and found myself face to face with Melissa. My wife stood in the passage leading back to the church, wearing the blue sundress she'd been buried in. Her skin was pale, her movements fluid but somehow wrong, like a marionette controlled by unpracticed hands. "Jessie," she said, her voice perfect. "We've been waiting for you." Behind her, in the shadows, stood a small figure I recognized instantly as Emma. "You're not real," I whispered, though my heart lurched with desperate hope. Melissa's smile stretched a fraction too wide. "We're as real as you need us to be. We can be a family again." "Mom's right, Daddy," Emma said, stepping forward to clutch Melissa's hand. "We can all stay here together." They looked so real. Melissa's chestnut hair falling across her shoulders, just as it always had. Emma's missing front tooth visible when she smiled. The small mole on Melissa's neck that I used to kiss. I took an involuntary step toward them. Melissa extended her hand. "We've missed you so much." "All you have to do is stay," Emma added. "Stay with us." My fingers almost brushed Melissa's when I noticed it. A flicker in her eyes, like a television changing channels. For a split second, I saw something else behind her familiar brown irises, something ancient and hungry. I recoiled, stumbling back against the altar. "You're not them." Melissa's face remained sympathetic, loving. "Of course we are, honey. You're just confused." "We died in April," I said, finding strength in the painful truth. "A truck ran a red light at Northwest Expressway in Rockwell. You were driving Emma to soccer practice." "That's what they told you," Melissa said soothingly. "But we've been here, waiting for you to find us." Her logic was seductive, offering an alternative to my nightmare reality. How desperately I wanted to believe her. Emma stepped forward, holding out Mr. Patches. "You promised we'd always be together, Daddy." I stared at the toy in her hands. It was perfect. Every stain, every worn patch exactly as I remembered. But then, I noticed a crucial detail. The grape juice stain was on the right arm, not the left. It wasn't Mr. Patches. It was a copy, created from my memory. "You're not my daughter," I said, my voice breaking. Emma would know Mr. Patches had the stain on his left arm. The singing, which had faded to background noise, suddenly surged in volume. Emma's face contorted in rage, her features momentarily blurring like disturbed water. "Stay with us!" The voice that emerged was not a child's. I bolted, shoving past Melissa, whose arm felt wrong under my hand, too firm, like wood rather than flesh. Her fingers clawed at my jacket, supernaturally strong. "You can't leave," she hissed, her face flickering between my wife's features and something else, something with too many eyes. I tore free and ran down the passage, pursued by the cacophony of singing voices. Behind me, footsteps pattered, not 2 sets, but many, as if a crowd gave chase. I burst into the main church, sprinting for the exit. The statue of St. Augustine had somehow moved, now standing directly in my path. Its stone face was no longer benign, but twisted in an expression of malice. Outside, night had fully fallen. Stars glittered coldly above St. Augustine's as I raced to my car, hands fumbling with the keys. The singing had followed me, now seeming to come from all directions at once. As I jammed the key into the ignition, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Countless figures stood in the church doorway, Melissa and Emma in front, but behind them, shadows with indistinct features. They didn't pursue me beyond the threshold. I peeled out of the lot, gravel spraying beneath my tires. In the mirror, I could see the church receding, dark against the night sky. For a moment, I thought I saw something huge and shapeless moving behind it, larger than the building itself. Then the headlights caught a figure standing in the middle of the road. Sheriff Vaughn, his eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. I swerved, nearly rolling the SUV as I careened past. In my mirror, the figure remained motionless, watching me drive away. Its posture was Vaughn's, but something about its stillness wasn't human. By the time I reached the motel, I was shaking so badly I could barely unlock my room. Inside, I collapsed against the door, adrenaline draining away to leave hollow terror. On the bed lay my phone, which I was certain I'd taken with me. A new text message glowed on the screen. Rules only work if you follow all of them. You came after sunset. See you tomorrow. We'll be waiting. I deleted the message with trembling fingers. Then I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The salt line at my door was unbroken. Sleep was difficult. I spent the night with my back against the door, jumping at every sound. The hum of the ancient air conditioner, the occasional car passing on the highway, the settling of the old building. My laptop became my lifeline as I researched frantically, looking for answers. I started with the Comanche legends Sheriff Vaughn had mentioned. The Pahayoko was described as a shape-shifting demon that could appear as a loved one, luring victims to their doom. But there were older stories, too. Tales of a being that existed before humans arrived in the territory. Something that fed on grief and longing. Around 3 a.m., I found an obscure academic paper about St. Augustine's Church. It had been built in 1902 by Father Thomas Callahan, who had previously spent time with Comanche tribes as a missionary. What caught my attention was a footnote mentioning that Callahan had been excommunicated in 1906 for heretical practices and unholy congress with native spirits. The church had continued operating under different leadership until 1987, when it was officially deconsecrated after a series of unfortunate incidents. The paper didn't elaborate, but a linked reference led me to digitized newspaper archives. The Boise City News, June 10th, 1987. Local church closes following tragic death of priest. Father Michael Brennan had been found in the church basement, his throat cut, surrounded by unusual markings on the floor. The police ruled it suicide, but parishioners reportedly claimed Father Brennan had been acting strangely for months, speaking of voices from behind the altar. By dawn, my eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I'd found enough to convince me there was something truly wrong with St. Augustine's. Not just haunted, something worse. I showered and dressed mechanically, wondering if I should just drive away. Back to Oklahoma City. Back to my empty house and the memories that haunted it. But then I'd never know if there was any true connection to Melissa and Emma, or just an entity clever enough to mimic them from my memories. As a scientist, I needed to understand. As a grieving husband and father, I needed closure. I checked out of the motel, ignoring the curious stare of Betty at the front desk. Instead of heading to the church, I drove to the Cimarron County Historical Society, a modest brick building near the courthouse. Richard Dawes was surprised to see me. "Professor Harper, you look troubled." "I need everything you have on Father Thomas Callahan and Father Michael Brennan," I said without preamble. Richard's expression darkened. "What happened at the church?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think there's more to its history than you told me." He sighed heavily. "Follow me." He led me to a small research room in the back, unlocking a cabinet with a key from his pocket. "These aren't part of our public collection. Too many local sensitivities." The folder he handed me was thick with yellowed papers, newspaper clippings, and photographs. I spread them across the table, skimming quickly. Father Callahan's journal entries described his fascination with Comanche spiritual practices and his belief that their demons were misunderstood manifestations of a higher power. Later entries became increasingly erratic, describing the entity that lived beneath the church land. March 14th, 1905. The entity has revealed itself more fully. It requires blood to manifest, but offers knowledge beyond human understanding in return. I have made a covenant with it. The church will stand as both prison and portal. June 30th, 1905. The symbols beneath the foundation must never be disturbed. They bind the entity, but also allow communion with it. In my absence, the rituals must continue. I have inscribed the necessary rules for those who follow. The original 7 rules were there, in Callahan's handwriting, but with explanations that had been omitted from Webb's version. 1. Enter only between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. Be out by sunset. The entity's power grows with darkness. 2. No photography recording in the basement. Attempts to document the symbols weaken their binding power. 3. If you hear singing from behind the altar, leave immediately. The singing indicates the entity is gathering strength to manifest. 4. Always acknowledge the statue of St. Augustine with a nod when entering. The saint's image serves as a watcher and warning system. 5. Leave offerings at the south transept window daily. These appease the entity and prevent it from seeking sustenance elsewhere. 6. If the crucifix is missing, do not stay. The entity has broken its first bond and is moving freely within the church. 7. Never bleed on church grounds. Blood serves as invitation and nourishment, allowing the entity to access your memories and desires. Photos from 1987 showed the basement floor with the symbols I'd seen, alongside the body of Father Brennan. The markings around him appeared to be drawn in blood, his own, according to the coroner's report. Most disturbing was a series of witness statements from parishioners in the weeks before Brennan's death. They reported seeing him talking to people who weren't there, including his mother who had died years earlier. "Did you know about all this?" I asked Richard, who had been hovering anxiously. "Not the details. Just enough to know the church should be left alone." He hesitated. "You've experienced something there, haven't you?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Then you understand why we've kept these records separate. The power of suggestion is strong. These accounts could create mass hysteria if widely circulated. Or they could warn people away from real danger," I countered. Richard looked away. The Historical Society Board is divided on what to do with the church. Some want it restored as a historical landmark. Others want it razed to the ground. And you? I want to understand it, like you. He met my eyes, but not at any cost. The implication was clear. He thought I was in danger, and he was right. I photographed every document with my phone, then headed to the local diner for coffee and to gather my thoughts. The lunch crowd at Donna's Diner offered welcome anonymity, as I reviewed what I'd learned. Father Callahan had made some sort of pact with an entity he found beneath the church site. The rules were meant to contain it, while allowing controlled interaction. Father Brennan had apparently broken the rules, specifically Rule 7, and paid with his life. And I had broken 2 rules already, photographing the basement and bleeding on church grounds. I recalled the sheriff's description of his brother, unable to distinguish reality after his encounter at the church. Was that happening to me now? The unbroken salt line at my motel door suggested something had gotten to me while I was at the church. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. "We miss you, Daddy. When are you coming back? The nice sheriff is here with us now." Attached was a photo of Emma, Melissa, and Sheriff Vaughn standing in front of the altar. All 3 smiled at the camera, but Vaughn's eyes were completely black. I nearly dropped the phone. The timestamp showed the photo was taken 2 minutes ago. I needed to talk to the real Sheriff Vaughn, if he was still alive. The Cimarron County Sheriff's Office was a small brick building on the edge of town. The reception desk was manned by a young deputy whose nameplate read Hernandez. "I need to speak with Sheriff Vaughn," I said urgently. Deputy Hernandez frowned. "The sheriff's out on a call. Can I help you?" "Where did he go?" "It's an emergency." "Sir, calm down. Sheriff called in about 20 minutes ago saying he was checking on a disturbance out at St. Augustine's Church." My blood ran cold. "Did he go alone?" "Always does. Why? What's this about?" I showed him the photo on my phone. "I just received this. That's not Sheriff Vaughn." Hernandez studied the image, his expression morphing from skepticism to concern. That's not right. The sheriff wouldn't." He reached for his radio. "Sheriff Vaughn, come in. This is Deputy Hernandez. Do you copy?" Static answered him. "Sheriff Vaughn, please respond. We have a situation." More static, then a burst of sound that might have been a voice, distorted beyond recognition. "Damn it." Hernandez grabbed his keys and hat. "I'm going out there." "I'm coming with you," I said. He looked like he might argue, then nodded curtly. "You can follow in your vehicle, but stay behind me, understand?" We raced out of town, sirens blazing. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, maybe 2 hours until sunset. As we approached the turnoff for Old Trader Road, my phone rang. Sheriff Vaughn's number. I answered on speaker so Hernandez could hear. "Hello? Professor Harper." It was Vaughn's voice, but flat, emotionless. "We're waiting for you at the church. Your family is anxious to see you again." "Who am I speaking to?" I asked, as Hernandez's face paled. "Sheriff Vaughn, of course. Who else would it be?" A sound like wet chuckling followed. "Your little girl wants to say hello." "Daddy?" Emma's voice frightened. "Daddy, please help. It's wearing the sheriff's face, but it's not him. It's not..." Her voice cut off with a choked sound. "Emma!" I shouted uselessly. "Come to the church, Professor." The voice was no longer trying to sound like Vaughn. It had become something multi-layered and ancient. "Come before sunset, and maybe you can save them. The real Sheriff Vaughn still has a pulse. For now." The call ended. "Jesus Christ," Hernandez whispered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "What the hell was that?" "Pull over," I said. "I need to tell you what we're dealing with." Parked on the shoulder, I gave Hernandez the condensed version. The entity beneath the church, the rules, my experiences. To his credit, he listened without interruption. "So, you're saying the church is haunted?" he asked when I finished. "Not haunted. Inhabited by something that can access memories, create convincing imitations of people." I showed him Callahan's journal entries and the crime scene photos of Father Brennan. "This thing has killed before." Hernandez removed his cap, running a hand through his hair. "I've heard stories about that church my whole life. thought they were bullshit to scare kids. They're not. And whatever's in there has Sheriff Vaughn. If he's still alive. Hernandez's jaw set determinedly. I'm calling for backup. There's no time, I said, checking my watch. Sun sets in less than 2 hours. The entity is strongest after dark. So what's your plan? Just walk in there? I considered our options. We follow the rules, go in before sunset, acknowledge the statue, no photos in the basement, no blood. And the crucifix? Rule 6. I hadn't thought of that. We check if it's there. If not, we retreat and wait for backup. Hernandez nodded grimly, checking his service weapon. I'll lead. Stay behind me and do exactly as I say. As we turned onto Old Trader Road, my phone chimed again. A video message. Emma crying, begging for help. The church visible behind her. I knew it wasn't really her. Knew it couldn't be. But her voice, her face, they were perfect. And despite everything I'd learned, a part of me still hoped. That hope, I realized, was exactly what the entity was counting on. St. Augustine's stood silhouetted against the late afternoon sun as we approached, the weathered spire throwing a long shadow across the prairie grass. The sheriff's cruiser was parked haphazardly near the entrance, driver's door still open. He came in a hurry, Hernandez murmured, drawing his weapon as we pulled up. I checked my watch. 5:17 p.m. Less than an hour until sunset. Remember the rules, I reminded him as we approached the church. Nod to the statue. No blood. If you hear singing, we leave immediately. Hernandez gave a terse nod, though I could see the skepticism warring with fear in his eyes. He was humoring me, but also scared enough to take precautions. The heavy wooden doors stood wide open. Beyond the threshold, the church interior appeared darker than it should have been at this hour, shadows pooling unnaturally in the corners. Sheriff Vaughn? Hernandez called, his voice echoing in the silence. This is Deputy Hernandez. Are you in there, sir? No response. We paused at the entrance. The statue of St. Augustine stood just inside, but something was different. Its head was bowed now, as if in mourning or warning. I nodded to it as I crossed the threshold. After a moment's hesitation, Hernandez did the same. The nave stretched before us, pews casting zebra-striped shadows in the light from the tall windows. Dust motes danced in the air, too numerous, too deliberate in their movements, like they were watching us. Check for the crucifix, I whispered, pointing to the space above the altar where a large cross should have hung. It was gone. Hernandez swore under his breath. That's Rule 6, right? If the crucifix is missing, don't stay. We need to find Vaughn, I said, though every instinct screamed to run. But let's be quick. We moved cautiously down the central aisle, Hernandez's footsteps unnaturally loud on the wooden floor. Mine made no sound at all, I realized with a chill. Sheriff? Hernandez called again, swinging his flashlight beam into the dark corners. Professor Harper and I are here to help. A soft thud came from behind the altar, like something heavy falling against wood. Hernandez motioned for me to stay back as he approached, gun raised. I followed at a distance, scanning for any movement in the shadows. The small wooden door behind the altar, the one leading to the underground chamber, was closed. A dark stain that looked horribly like blood had seeped from beneath it, forming a small pool on the altar steps. Hernandez saw it too. What the hell? His radio crackled suddenly, making us both jump. A voice came through, distorted by static, but recognizable as Sheriff Vaughn's. Hernandez, basement, don't trust, looks like. The transmission cut off abruptly. That came from below, I said, pointing to the main basement entrance across the nave. "You said no photography in the basement. Any rule against going down there?" Hernandez asked, already moving toward the door. "No, but then let's go. Sunset's coming." The basement door opened with an ominous creak. Stone steps descended into darkness. Hernandez led the way, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The basement was, as I remembered, vast, with earth floor and support columns, but the symbols etched around the columns seemed fresher somehow, as if recently redrawn. They pulsed faintly in the flashlight beam with a sickly luminescence. "Sheriff," Hernandez called, his voice flatter down here, without echo. A muffled sound came from the far corner, where the basement extended beyond the flashlight's reach. We moved cautiously toward it. As we approached, I made out a figure slumped against the wall. Sheriff Vaughn. His hands and feet were bound with what looked like stretched, sinuous roots emerging from the earth itself. A gag of the same material covered his mouth. His eyes, wild with fear and warning, fixed on us as we approached. "Jesus," Hernandez breathed, holstering his weapon to free his hands. "Hold on, Sheriff, we'll get you out." I grabbed his arm. "Wait." Something was wrong. The symbols on the floor around Vaughn formed a perfect circle, different from the others in the basement. And despite his bound position, there was no sign of struggle. No disturbed earth, no scuff marks. "That's not him," I whispered. Hernandez looked at me like I was insane. "What are you talking about? It's clearly..." "Think about it. Why would the entity tell us to come here if Vaughn was just tied up in the basement? It's a trap." The bound sheriff made more urgent noises behind his gag, shaking his head frantically. Hernandez hesitated, torn between my warning and his duty to his superior. "We can't just leave him." "Check his eyes," I insisted. "Sheriff, blink 3 times if you're really you." The figure stared unblinkingly, then slowly smiled around the gag, a smile that stretched wider than any human mouth should. Hernandez stumbled back. Holy shit. The thing that wasn't Sheriff Vaughn began to change, its form rippling like disturbed water. The bonds melted back into the earth. It stood, growing taller, limbs elongating unnaturally. Its face remained Vaughn's, but distorted, features sliding across the surface like oil on water. "We need to go. Now!" I pulled at Hernandez's arm, but he stood frozen in horror. A familiar voice called from the stairs behind us. "Daddy, is that you?" I turned to see Emma standing on the bottom step, dressed in her favorite yellow sundress. She looked exactly as she had the day of the accident, down to the grass stain on her knee from soccer practice. "That's not her," I told myself aloud. "It's not real." "Who are you talking to?" Hernandez asked, confused. "There's no one there." The entity was showing Emma only to me. "Daddy, I'm scared," Emma said, tears welling in her eyes. "The bad man won't let us go." "Us?" Melissa appeared behind Emma, one hand on our daughter's shoulder. "Jesse, please help us. We're trapped here." My heart twisted painfully. They looked so real, so present. I took an involuntary step toward them. "Harper, what are you doing?" Hernandez's voice seemed to come from far away. "There's nothing there." The not Vaughn thing advanced on Hernandez, its movements jerky and wrong. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of teeth like those of a deep-sea predator. "Run!" I shouted, snapping out of my trance. I grabbed Hernandez's jacket and pulled him toward the stairs. The deputy finally broke his paralysis and bolted with me. Behind us, the thing let out a sound like tearing metal. Emma and Melissa still stood on the stairs, blocking our escape. I steeled myself and ran straight at them, pulling Hernandez with me. "What are you seeing?" he gasped as we ran. "My family. They're not real. As we reached the stairs, I forced myself to move through the apparitions of my wife and daughter. They dissolved like smoke as I passed through, but I felt a cold, slithering sensation against my skin that made me gag. Emma's voice called after us, distorting into something ancient and hateful. "You can't leave us here, Daddy." We burst into the main church, slamming the basement door behind us. Hernandez pushed a heavy pew against it, though we both knew it wouldn't hold whatever was down there for long. "Where's the real Sheriff Vaughn?" Hernandez panted, drawing his weapon again. A pained groan answered from the direction of the altar. We rushed forward to find Vaughn sprawled behind it, blood seeping from a wound on his temple. His skin was ashen, eyes unfocused. "Something wearing my face," he managed, his voice barely audible. "Showed me my brother, dead brother." "We need to get him out of here," I said, checking my watch. 5:42 p.m. Sunset was approaching fast. As we helped Vaughn to his feet, my gaze fell on the small wooden door behind the altar. It was open now, and from the passage beyond came the sound of soft singing. Multiple voices in unnervingly perfect harmony. Rule 3. If you hear singing from behind the altar, leave immediately. We need to go, now. I supported one side of Vaughn, while Hernandez took the other. We moved as quickly as we could toward the exit, the sheriff's boots dragging on the wooden floor. The singing grew louder, and with it came a vibration that shook dust from the rafters. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe. 10 feet from the door, the statue of St. Augustine suddenly rotated, its stone face now turned toward us. The blank eyes seemed to follow our movement. 5 feet from the door, the singing stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. We reached the threshold just as the basement door exploded outward, sending splinters of wood and iron hardware flying across the nave. Something emerged, something large and shapeless, like living shadow. "Go!" I shouted, practically dragging Vaughn over the threshold. Outside, the sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the church grounds. We stumbled toward the vehicles, Vaughn growing heavier with each step. "Get him in my car," I gasped to Hernandez. As we reached the SUV, I glanced back at the church. Figures stood in the doorway. Emma, Melissa, the twisted version of Sheriff Vaughn, and others I didn't recognize. Behind them loomed a darkness that seemed to absorb the fading sunlight. They made no move to follow us beyond the church grounds, confirming what I'd suspected. The entity was bound to the location, at least physically. We loaded Vaughn into the back seat of my SUV and peeled out of the lot, gravel spraying. Hernandez followed in the sheriff's cruiser. "They're not following," Vaughn murmured from the back seat, his voice strengthening slightly. "They can't leave the church," I said, watching the building recede in my rearview mirror. "But they can reach out in other ways." As if on cue, my phone rang. The screen showed Melissa's contact photo. Impossible, since I deleted her number after the funeral, unable to bear seeing her name in my contacts. I ignored it. "What was that thing?" Vaughn asked. "It knew things. Things only my brother would know. Something old. Something that feeds on grief and longing." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "And it's not finished with us." My phone chimed with a text message. Despite my better judgment, I glanced at it when we stopped at the turn onto the highway. It was a photo of Emma, tears streaming down her face, holding a sign with childish handwriting. "Don't leave us here with it, Daddy." Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, was a tall, emaciated figure with too many limbs and no face. Just smooth, featureless skin where features should be. Something the entity hadn't meant me to see, I realized. A glimpse of its true form. or another manipulation designed to draw me back. We need to destroy it, I said, more to myself than to Vaughn, before it breaks free completely. The sheriff's pale eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. The rules. There must be a reason for them, a way to contain it. I nodded slowly, and maybe a way to end it. We regrouped at the Cimarron County Hospital, a single-story brick building with only 10 beds, but thankfully a competent emergency room doctor. Dr. Patel examined Sheriff Vaughn, cleaning and stitching the gash on his temple. Mild concussion, she informed us in the waiting area. He's lucky it wasn't worse. What happened out there? Hernandez and I exchanged glances. He fell investigating an abandoned building, Hernandez supplied. The doctor's skeptical expression made it clear she didn't believe him, but she didn't press further. He needs rest. We'll keep him overnight for observation. After she left, Hernandez turned to me. So what now? Call him the National Guard? Exorcist? I don't even know what the protocol is for something like this. I stared out the window at the darkening sky. We need to understand what we're dealing with. Really understand it. I thought that was pretty clear. Some kind of demon thing that wears people's faces. It's more than that. The entity has been there for centuries, maybe longer. Father Callahan didn't create it. He found it and thought he could contain it. Fat lot of good that did, Hernandez muttered. So what's your plan? I need to talk to someone who might have knowledge of what this thing really is before Callahan tried to Christianize it. The local tribes knew about it long before the church was built. You're thinking of a tribal elder. Hernandez considered this. My wife's aunt married into the Comanche tribe. Lives on a ranch about 40 minutes west of here. Gabriel Redhorse. If anyone knows the old stories, it would be him. A quick call confirmed Gabriel was home and willing to meet with us. Hernandez insisted on coming along, and I was grateful for his company. My phone had continued buzzing with messages and calls from Melissa and Emma, each more disturbing than the last. I'd finally turned it off. Gabriel Redhorse's ranch sat on the Oklahoma-New Mexico border, the modest house dwarfed by the vast landscape surrounding it. A man in his 70s, with deeply lined face and alert eyes, met us on the porch. Deputy Hernandez, he greeted with a nod. And you must be Professor Harper. Come inside. The interior was warm and lived in, walls decorated with both traditional artwork and family photos. Gabriel led us to a kitchen table where his wife, Martha, had prepared coffee. Miguel tells me you've encountered something at the old church, Gabriel said without preamble after introductions. Something that wears faces. I described our experiences, along with what I'd learned about Father Callahan. Gabriel listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if I were confirming things he already knew. My grandfather called it Nuh-mu-nu, he said when I finished. The hunger that walks. The settlers built their church on land our people avoided for generations. What exactly is it? I asked. Gabriel's weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug. Not a spirit or ghost as white people understand such things. More like a wound in the world. A tear between realities that developed awareness. It feeds on yearning. The stronger the longing, the more it can manifest. That's why it shows me my dead wife and daughter, I said quietly. Gabriel nodded. Your grief is powerful food. The more you want to believe, the stronger it becomes. The rules at the church, Hernandez interjected. Were they actually containing this thing? After a fashion. Your father Callahan understood some truths. The binding symbols in the basement create boundaries. The offerings sustain it enough to prevent it from meeting to hunt. The restriction against blood prevents it from creating stronger connections. Could we destroy it? I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind. Gabriel exchanged glances with Martha. Not easily. My grandfather was part of a group that tried in 1897. Most died. Afterward, Callahan arrived and built the church, thinking Christian symbols would bind what tribal magic could not. But it can be done? I pressed. Perhaps. Gabriel rose and retrieved a small wooden box from a shelf. From it, he withdrew a folded piece of buckskin. This contains symbols that, when placed at the cardinal points of the church and activated with fire, might close the tier. Might. Hernandez echoed skeptically. It's the best chance you have, Gabriel replied. But it requires perfect timing and precise placement, and the entity will fight you with everything it has. There's something else. Martha spoke for the first time. The tier is widest at the dark of the moon, when the entity is strongest. That's tomorrow night. A chill ran through me. What happens if we don't stop it? Gabriel's expression was grave. The rules have contained it for decades, but rules can be broken. If it fully manifests during the dark moon, it could extend its reach beyond the church. It would start with those it has connected with, those who have bled on its ground or been shown visions. Like us, Hernandez said quietly. Gabriel nodded, and then beyond. A hunger like that is never satisfied. He spent the next hour explaining the ritual. The symbols needed to be carved into the church at precise locations, north, south, east, and west, then burned simultaneously as specific words were spoken. The timing had to coincide exactly with the peak of the dark moon. It's best done by 4 people, Gabriel warned, but no fewer than 2. I'll help, Hernandez volunteered immediately, though I could see the fear behind his eyes. Me too, I said, and maybe Sheriff Vaughn, if he's recovered enough. One more thing. Gabriel fixed me with an intense stare. The entity will use your grief against you. It will show you your family, more real than ever, promising reunion, salvation, anything to stop you. I know they're not real, I insisted. Knowing and believing are different when faced with what you most desire. His hand closed over mine. If you waver, even for a moment, it will take you. We left with the buckskin map, ritual instructions, and 4 curved obsidian knives Gabriel insisted were necessary for carving the symbols. The drive back to Boise City was silent, both of us processing what we'd learned. At the hospital, we found Sheriff Vaughn sitting up in bed, color returned to his face. Dr. Patel had wanted to keep him overnight, but he was insisting on leaving. There's no way I'm staying here while that thing is out there, he said when we entered his room. We brought him up to speed on Gabriel's information and the planned ritual. Vaughn listened intently, then nodded. I'm in. Better to end it now than wait for it to break free completely. Are you sure you're up for it? I asked, eyeing the bandage on his temple. That thing showed me my dead brother, Vaughn said grimly. Used his voice, his memories. I need to be there when we destroy it. Dr. Patel wasn't happy, but she couldn't legally keep him. By 9 p.m., we were gathered in Vaughn's office at the sheriff's station, planning our approach. We need one more person, Hernandez reminded us, indicating the 4 symbols on Gabriel's map. I'll call Richard Dawes from the Historical Society, I suggested. He knows enough about the church to understand what we're facing. Richard arrived 30 minutes later, face pale but determined when we explained the situation. I always knew there was something wrong with that place. I felt it every time I visited, just never wanted to admit it. We spent the next few hours preparing. Gabriel had emphasized that the dark moon's peak would occur at precisely 3:17 a.m., the witching hour stretched by the cosmological event, We would need to enter the church, place the symbols, and be ready to activate them simultaneously at that exact moment. "What if the entity tries to stop us?" Richard asked, voicing what we were all thinking. "It will," Vaughn said flatly. "That's why we go prepared." He unlocked a cabinet and withdrew 4 shotguns. "Rock salt rounds won't kill it, but might slow it down." Gabriel mentioned salt as a deterrent in the old stories. I checked my watch. 11:42 p.m. We should get some rest before we go. A few hours of sleep could make all the difference. None of us were keen to separate, so we set up cots in the station's break room. I doubted any of us would actually sleep, but even lying down would help conserve energy for what was coming. As I closed my eyes, my phone, which I'd finally turned back on, buzzed with a new message. Against my better judgment, I looked at it. A video from an unknown number. Emma, sitting in what appeared to be the chamber beneath the altar. "Daddy," she sobbed, "it's hurting us. Please hurry." The camera panned to show Melissa nearby, unmoving. Then it tilted up to reveal a tall, spindly figure standing over them, its featureless face bent toward the camera. A voice that was not Emma's spoke. "We found more visitors today. They were asking about you." The camera shifted again to show Frank Littlebird, my colleague who had sent me to the church in the first place, and Betty from the motel, both unconscious on the stone floor. "Come alone, Jesse. Before the dark moon, or they all die." The video ended. My hands shook as I debated whether to show the others. They were real people, Frank and Betty, not apparitions created from my memories. The entity had expanded its reach, just as Gabriel had warned it might. I glanced at the others. Vaughn was already asleep, his concussion likely contributing to his exhaustion. Hernandez and Richard were talking quietly in the corner. My grief had brought me to St. Augustine's. My blood had strengthened the entity. In a very real sense, this was my responsibility. I slipped the obsidian knife for the southern symbol into my pocket, along with Gabriel's instructions. Taking one of the shotguns, I left a brief note. "Gone to stall it. Follow the plan. J." The night was cool and clear as I drove toward the church, stars brilliant in the moonless sky. St. Augustine's silhouette appeared on the horizon, a black cutout against the starscape. No lights showed in its windows, but I knew it wasn't empty. It was waiting for me. 3 months have passed since that night at St. Augustine's Church. The bandages on my hands have finally come off, revealing puckered scar tissue where the obsidian knife cut into my palms. The doctors say I'm lucky to have kept full mobility in my fingers. The others didn't fare as well. Betty from the motel survived, though she doesn't speak anymore. The doctors call it selective mutism, brought on by trauma. Her eyes track movement no one else can see. Frank died in the ambulance. Cerebral hemorrhage, officially. But I saw what really happened when the entity realized we had surrounded it with Gabriel's symbols. It reached into Frank's mind and simply squeezed. Richard Dawes walks with a cane now. He says the cold in his right leg never goes away, even in the Oklahoma summer heat. Like it's still touching me, he told me once, before we stopped discussing that night altogether. Sheriff Vaughn and Deputy Hernandez have become local heroes of sorts. The official story, gas leak, structural collapse, miraculous rescue, made the regional news. Neither corrects the record. Some truths are better left unspoken. As for me, I've returned to Oklahoma City University. Not to teach. I'm not ready for that. But to research. The library's special collections contain documents from other places, like St. Augustine's. Other wombs in the world where reality wears thin. They're out there, waiting, Sometimes I see them from the corner of my eye, Melissa and Emma, standing in doorways or reflected in windows. Not as they appeared in the church, but transparent, watchful. I don't know if they're lingering effects of the entity's manipulation or something else entirely. I don't approach them. Don't speak to them. That's one lesson I learned well. The Historical Society razed St. Augustine's to the ground last month. They salted the earth and poured concrete over the foundation. Officially, it's classified as an environmental hazard site. Cimarron County has placed a moratorium on any future building there. I still have nightmares about what happened after I arrived alone that night. About the thing that wore so many faces as it circled me in the church basement. About the moment when Vaughn, Hernandez, and Richard burst in, just as I was about to give in to its promises. I remember the entity's scream as the symbols burned at the 4 compass points. How it thrashed between forms, human, animal, and things I lack words to describe. How the walls of the church seemed to bow inward as reality reasserted itself. Most clearly, I remember the final vision it showed me as it was dragged back into the tear, Emma and Melissa, reaching toward me, their faces not masks, but somehow genuine, filled with a mix of relief and sadness. "Thank you, Daddy," Emma had whispered. "Now we can rest." Were those final images just one more manipulation? Or had there been something of my family caught within the entity all along? I'll never know for certain. Gabriel Redhorse says the tear is closed but not healed, that such wounds never fully mend. "You carry a piece of it with you now," he told me when I visited him last week. "Be watchful." I am watchful. Every day. Every night. I still have the paper with the 7 rules. I keep it in my wallet, a reminder of what waits in the dark places of the world. A reminder of what can happen when grief blinds us to danger. And I still leave small offerings on my windowsill each morning, just in case. Some rules are worth following, even after the church is gone.